Epic Fury destroyed much of it, but it still needs to be discussed because it's a delivery system for these. So that's been a part of the negotiations, correct?
Okay. Again, quoting from the May 8th document, the JCPOA foolishly gave the Iranian regime a windfall of cash and access to international financial system for trade and investment, end quote. Can you commit to this committee that any resulting deal will not foolishly give the Iranian regime a windfall of cash and access to the international financial system for trade and investment?
Yes, because they're not going to get any sanctions relief of any kind unless they get rid of enrichment and they get rid of the highly enriched uranium.
Thank you. Third point, and I'm again quoting from the original document, the Iranian regime must never have an ICBM, cease developing any nuclear-capable missiles, and stop proliferating ballistic missiles to others, end quote. Can you commit to this committee that any resulting deal will cause Iran to cease developing its nuclear-capable missiles and stop proliferating ballistic missiles to others?
We consider delivery systems to be a part of them having a nuclear weapon, which we said they'll never have.
Right, and just because you have 40 seconds, again quoting, quote, the Iranian regime must stop its threat to freedom of navigation, especially in the Persian Gulf and Red Sea. That was in 2018. Can you commit to the committee that any deal will cause Iran to stop its threats to freedom of navigation, especially in the Gulf?
Now, if you're not commit to that, we won't even be able to enter negotiations until they do that.
Okay. And finally, can you commit that any agreement this administration enters into will ensure Iran cannot develop a nuclear weapon?
That's the whole goal here, absolutely.
Okay. In that vein, and most importantly, can you commit to this committee that any documented agreement related to Iran's nuclear program will be brought before Congress as required by ANARA, which I believe you voted for?
We will comply with ANARA.
Thank you. I yield back.
And thank you, Mr. Schneider, for letting him answer your questions. Representative Barr.
I was efficient. This guy's.
Mr. Secretary, thanks for the great job you're doing. Some Democrats are making the laughable claim that Iran is stronger today than they were before Epic Fury started because of the disruption in the Strait of Hormuz. You've seen the Trump derangement syndrome in the hearing today. Can you set the record straight on whether or not Iran is stronger today?
Well, they have no Navy, they have no Air Force, they have no air defenses, they have they have massive destruction to the defense industrial base. They've lost a substantial percentage of their missile launchers and of their drone launchers as well. They're not benefiting from the straits being closed because the blockade is keeping them from hundreds of millions of dollars a day in revenue. They've had their ships seized in the Indo-Pacific. Their leadership is fractured. They have hyperinflation. Their currency is worthless, and they're having trouble making payroll. I guess other than that, they're doing well.
Thank you. Do you believe that keeping the credible threat of kinetic military force on the table and the president's willingness to use such force is important to your diplomatic leverage?
Yes, because unfortunately we are dealing with a group of people that don't understand anything but that.
And so the resolution that's on the floor in the U.S. House this week would do what to the U.S. leverage?
I don't think technically it does anything. I think perceptionally it allows the Iranians to believe that somehow they don't have to make a deal because there's no threat of something bad happening to them if they don't.
And just as a follow-up to my friend Congressman Schneider's line of questioning, can you describe the key differences between the terms of the deal that you all are negotiating with Iran today versus the terms of the JCPOA?
What we're discussing now is what the negotiations will be about. And it will be about no enrichment, what they're going to do with their enrichment, and what they're going to do with the highly enriched uranium being removed and being disposed of. That wasn't a part of JCPOA. The other thing is the JCPOA was time limited. In fact, the prohibition on certain enrichment would have been expiring this very year. This very year would have been expiring, so JCPOA right now would be expiring and they would be able to be in a position to then ramp up and do whatever they wanted in compliance with the JCPOA. So there are major differences even in the text of what we're discussing the negotiations are going to be about. But ultimately, any deal we do will be a good deal or it won't be a deal. And it'll be better than JCPOA.
Absolutely, and I think that's a key point is that this idea that you could draw any analogy between what's happening now, where the administration has totally obliterated the nuclear capabilities of Iran, plus their conventional capabilities. You're negotiating from a position of strength that the Obama and Biden administration was not negotiating from a position of strength at all, and provided upfront sanctions. We know what the result was. I want to shift to the Indo-Pacific real quick. As you know, the Taiwan Relations Act states that it is the policy of the United States to provide Taiwan with arms of a defensive character. Consistent with that policy, the Trump administration announced in December of 25 an $11 billion arms package package for Taiwan, the largest ever, including HIMARS, howitzers, drones, Javelin anti-tank missiles. As a result, the Taiwan legislature passed a $25 billion special defense budget that included funding for an even bigger arms deal for an air and missile defense totaling $14 billion, a deal that is not final and a deal that is under review. As you know, one of the 6 assurances states that the U.S. will not consult with the PRC on arms sales to Taiwan. Now, you've heard this. Critics of the administration have alleged, the media has alleged, as a result of the Beijing summit, that President Trump's recent meetings with Chinese leader Xi in Beijing not only paused Taiwan arms sales, that's their term, paused arms sales, but also violated the assurance that the U.S. will not consult with the PRC directly. Can you clear the air on this?
First of all, the $11 million in December was the single largest arms sales ever to Taiwan. It was more than happened cumulatively under 4 years of President Biden. And in fact, I recall that for 6 years, President Obama offered zero to Taiwan during his presidency. So it was such a big deal, by the way, that the Chinese reacted to it with really hyper activity in terms of military exercises around Taiwan. We don't consult with the Chinese on these arms sales. We're aware of their position. They talk about it all the time, and I don't need to tell you, it wouldn't be breaking news that they're not in favor of these arms sales. They raise it, but they are not negotiated and they're not consulted. That second deal, the $14 million one that's currently under review, and that would not be unusual for something.
So that's not a pause. That's not a pause. That's under review, and we've already done an $11 billion deal.
Just did one in December.
Right. So I think the mischaracterization of this as a pause doesn't reflect the administration's commitment that they've already made on the $11 billion deal. I yield back.
Yeah, correct.
Representative Barra is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary, for being here. I'll admit that I was hesitant and skeptical and did not support the actions that took place in Venezuela. I also will admit that thus far it's working out better than I would have expected. And, you know, long-term stability, if we can create a better life for the Venezuelan people, is a good thing. If we can reduce a threat in our hemisphere, that's a good thing as well. To the line of questioning that Ms. Kamlagerdev asked, I think it would go a long way. You mentioned that there's a KPMG audit of the Venezuelan funds, how the revenue is being used, how it's being reinvested in Venezuela. Would you publicly commit to providing that audit to this committee? And again, I think it would go a long way to...
It's an ongoing audit, so it's not a once-a-year audit. It's on every expenditure. Every single disbursement is audited by KPMG. I would also add one more point. There's a second layer of control here, and that is Citibank itself, because they hold the account. They also do the Know Your Customer regulations on it, which, by the way, has slowed down the disbursement in ways that have been problematic.
Would you commit to providing all that information?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's why we're doing the audit. We want people to see that it's not being stolen or pilfered. We think that's part of this recovery is so critical.
Again, I think that would go a long way to assuaging some of the concerns. I'm going to follow. Mr. Barr is a co-chair with me on the Taiwan caucus, and some of his line of questioning. I was going to ask you yes and no questions, but I'll ask a series of questions I think that go along with his line of questioning. Some of the comments that the president's made recently have created a little bit of ambiguity, but again, what you just suggested, nothing's changed in our relationship. In the Taiwan Relations Act, it states that the United States will make available to Taiwan such defense articles and defense services as may be necessary. The 6 assurances states that the United States does not agree to consult with the People's Republic of China regarding arms sales to Taiwan. The Taiwan's Relations Act, the 3 joint communiques, the 6 assurances have guided our one China policy for decades. And again, I think in your previous statements, nothing has changed with our commitment to upholding the U.S. one China policy. Is that correct?
Our policy on Taiwan has not changed.
Oh, great, thank you. Switching over to something that the administration's put a lot of focus on is our critical minerals, rare earths, developing our own capacity. I was supportive of the Mineral Security Partnership, now the Forge Act, working with our allies, super important. Work with Congresswoman Kim on the Dominance Act, which passed out of this committee, which I believe will be coming to the floor on suspension, hopefully on Monday. I think this is a strong bipartisan piece of legislation that supports a lot of the goals of the administration. It does, create redundancy and, not a reliance on China. It does help build refining capacity. It helps reinvigorate a workforce. There's a bipartisan companion bill in the Senate. I do think this would go a long way to achieving national security goals for the United States and is a good piece of legislation, and certainly would want you to take a look at that.
I will, and to be more consistent on this topic, on the critical minerals, literally every engagement we have, every country in the world is now discovering they have critical minerals and rare earths, even though they're not that rare. That's the mining part of it. The second part of it, as you know, is the processing and refining. We need to have that capability built too, and we're trying to create these global alliances to do that so that we're not overly dependent on these one source, particularly China.
Right. And third piece of questioning, I recently was in Korea meeting with the new Korean president. Lots of conversations taking place with the Koreans. One area we did talk about was, our commitment to being the nuclear deterrent for the peninsula and so forth. Has anything changed there?
No, our posture there remains the same. And in fact, we have new partnerships that we're trying to, now we're not trying to trigger a crisis there. We're not trying to trigger a war or anything problematic. But, at the mill-to-mill level, we have very strong relations with Korea.
Great. Also, have been talking to Australians, paying close attention to AUKUS. Again, our commitments to AUKUS, to that partnership, which is critical to our geopolitical security in the region, that commitment stays firm.
Correct. And not only that, with Australia is also part of the Quad that we have with Japan and India. They were at our meeting last week. We have a lot we're working on together with them and seek to expand it.
Great. And you mentioned that the Quad expects to have a leaders summit. I know that's been delayed a couple times. Do we expect the leaders?
We are hoping to be able to do one this year, maybe on the sidelines of another global gathering in the region, but nonetheless a meeting. Not a standalone, but as part of, where they're all going to be at the same time. It would be easier. We're working on getting that scheduled.
Right.
Representative Fine.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I firmly believe God puts us where he wants us to be, and I'm grateful every day he's put you where you are. So thank you for all the hard work that you're doing. I want to read you a couple statements and see if you agree with them. I suspect that you will. The first statement is, heaven forbid Iran were to ever obtain a nuclear weapon. Do you agree with that, I presume?
Yeah, I would use even stronger language.
Okay. Second one would be, Iran must never be allowed to obtain a nuclear weapon. Would you agree with that?
Baseline policy.
Okay. And then the third is, the Iranian regime must not gain nuclear weapons. Would you agree with that? These are statements, these are actual quotes from three members on the other side of the aisle who today gave you a whole lot of grief about what you're doing and what the president is doing to make sure those statements don't come to pass. Representatives Meeks, Liu, and Sherman. So my question to you is, what changed? I mean, why would people say they must never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon, and then when we're actually doing what is necessary to make sure they don't, all of a sudden, there's a very different tone as they ask you questions?
Yeah, I would say that the notion that they shouldn't have a nuclear weapon is widely held, and not just widely held by members of Congress. It's widely held by countries around the world. In fact, I don't know a single country in the world that says it would be a good idea for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. I think what's changed, or where the difference comes in, is, okay, what are you going to do about it? You ultimately have to do something about it. And when we saw that they were building up this conventional shield behind which they were going to hide their nuclear program and hold it immune from action, we had to address it. And that's what the president did with Epic Fury. So that was the difference. The difference is we actually did something about it, something that multiple administrations have held as their position. It was the Biden administration's position. It was the Obama administration's position. But this president actually did something about it. And, many countries around the world aren't willing to do anything about it except complain or, sign on to some letter somewhere. But we actually did something about it, because if we had not done so, in about a year, Iran would have had a conventional shield, and they could have been able to threaten not just the region, but parts of Europe, and they would have said, if you come after us in our nuclear program, we will impose costs on you you cannot bear, so now you have to let us have a nuclear weapon. We were never going to let them have that conventional shield.
So what happens, in your opinion, if we did what they're asking? We stand down, we stop, we go back to the strongly worded letters and lots of talking, but we don't take the action. We just go, well, we don't want them to have a nuclear weapon, but they're going to do what they're going to do. What do you think? What would your prediction be? what happens.
I think the long-term trajectory of Iran remains the same in that regard, as their ambition is to ultimately have a nuclear weapon. That is ultimately their ambition. They probably view it not just as regime security, the way that they do in North Korea. They view it as an ability to become the dominant power in the region. Once they possess a nuclear weapon, nothing stops them from sponsoring proxy groups all over the region to destabilize Jordan, Saudi Arabia, multiple Sunni countries, and of course wipe out Israel.
So it would be fair to say then that standing in the way of what you're trying to do over there, what we're trying to do over there, effectively is emboldening and enabling Iran to get that nuclear weapon.
Well, ultimately, anytime they don't fit, the only reason they would not go for a nuclear weapon is because they're forced not to. They're never going to do that voluntarily, and they've never agreed to anything voluntarily. Even the small concessions they made in JCPOA were in exchange for some benefit to them. So clearly, this is a regime that only understands that they will only do these things if they're compelled to do so, either through an incentive or through a punitive matter.
Okay, changing topics to UNRWA for a minute. As you know, on October 7th, 2023, there were employees of the United Nations in the form of UNRWA who actually participated in the terrorist attack that killed 1,200 people. What are we going to do to make sure that the UN can never, ever again employ terrorists that are going to go and kill people?
Well, obviously, we're not going to be working with UNRWA any longer. As you know, we've removed ourselves from that, and we refuse to engage them or be a part of the solution now in Gaza. There are plenty of other organizations that can play that role without having the sort of cooperation that they've had with Hamas elements, including the presence of Hamas elements within their ranks, as we've seen. And it's part of the thing that was being talked about earlier. In Gaza, what they don't tell you is a significant percentage of the aid, even the non-UNRWA aid that was entering, was winding up in the hands of Hamas, and they were reselling it in the black market and, of course, keeping it for themselves. That was not the purpose of the aid. What they're also not telling you is that one of the reasons why the World Food Program would not go in or could not go in is because their trucks were being hijacked, and their truckers would not go because they were putting their lives in danger. And this was all being systemized, weaponized, and manipulated by Hamas to their benefit.
Well, thank you again for everything you've done. Everyone in Florida is very proud of you, and we're cheering for the work that you do every day. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Ocheski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, Secretary Rubio's earlier testimony referenced the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, as a private citizen. But in President Trump's own words, Kushner is an envoy of peace alongside Steve Witkoff. So I ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a political article from February 19th detailing the president's announcement, which makes clear Kushner is more than a private citizen.
It's ordered.
Thank you. Secretary Rubio, as a senator back in 2023, referencing Hunter Biden, you said, quote, if his last name wasn't Biden, there's no way in the world that he would have made the millions of dollars he made. You also said we can't abandon common sense when someone profits from a family member in power. Is it fair to say that you agree that it's wrong for elected officials and their families to profit from positions of power?
To use government service to make money, yeah, of course.
Great. I appreciate that, and I share that sentiment with you, sir. I want to revisit some of the details that were brought up earlier and put into the record about the president's own stock transactions, a form which he filed that shows he completed more than 3,700 stock transactions in just the first 3 months of this year alone. The president bought hundreds of thousands of dollars in Palantir stock shortly before he publicly praised the company on his social media site. As if the name drop itself wasn't enough, he included the company's ticker symbol for good measure, hardly subtle to me. On March 23rd, after nearly a month of war with Iran, the president said talks were, quote, very good and productive, and extended his deadline for a deal by 5 days. Oil prices dropped and energy stocks fell, while Trump bought shares in companies like ExxonMobil, Chevron, and other firms positioned to benefit if the war continued, which it did at the president's direction. He bought a dip that he created. Then there's NVIDIA. The president bought as much as $1 million in stock just 1 week before the Commerce Department formally approved the sale of NVIDIA chips to China. 1 week. He bought up to $5 million more in NVIDIA stock in February, right before the company announced a major chip deal with Meta. It's pretty good luck if you ask me. If that's not bad enough, the president's son struck a multi-billion-dollar crypto deal with a UAE state-backed firm. After the deal, the administration reversed AI chip restrictions, approving transfers of sensitive technology to another UAE-related entity, chaired by the very same royal family figure involved with the deal with his son. That seems like hardly a coincidence to me. And indeed, it is self-enrichment tied directly to the president's foreign policy agenda, and it's how the president's net worth has grown by over $4 billion since he started this term. As the president gets rich, his wars and tariffs are crushing hardworking American families. And I think the American people see through the BS. This is the most corrupt administration in American history. So, Secretary Rubio, earlier today you said you didn't know the facts about the president's financial dealings. I'm happy to share them if you want to see it specifically, but having run through that, now that you do know, would you agree, and do you have concerns about the fact this administration is in fact profiting from their position of power?
Well, first of all, what I said is the information you guys were putting up, including on this board, first, that's not in my purview as in the Department of State, and these are things you're producing. I don't know if they're accurate or not, but let me just say this. I've been in every foreign policy and national security meeting for the most part this administration has had. Not once, not a single time have I ever seen even the hint or the indication that any of the decisions being made are for the financial gain of anyone in the administration. Those are my observations. That's what I can speak to. I have not once seen a directive on our foreign policy or our national security policy that in any way indicates that it's being done to the benefit of anyone personally. That's what I've seen as a firsthand witness, and that's what I can testify to today.
With all due respect, Mr. Secretary, I may have to get you a new pair of glasses because the facts are right in front of you, and it seems like malpractice for the Secretary of State to not be able to see this president and his family enriching themselves by billions of dollars. So the only thing I can, from my
No one has ever said in a meeting, let's go do this because it's going to help me make money.
Of course he's not going to say that.
But not even hint at it. Not even hint at it, not even, on the
Don't
contrary.
have to hint at it. The facts speak for themselves, sir. They're in the record. They're in the forms the president put forward himself. It's in the billions of dollars he has put in his pocket. It is the timing of the deals and the announcements. And the only thing I can see is, my question to you as I conclude my time, Mr. Secretary, is what's changed in your perspective? Is it the party affiliation of the president or is it your own political ambitions?
I already told you at the outset, people don't make, and I've seen the president say this, people should not be making money off of their government service. He said that repeatedly. I've heard him say that, but not once. I want to reiterate this. There has not been a single decision that's been made that I have witnessed or been a part of that in any way indicate to me or to any reasonable mind that this was linked to some financial agreement or arrangement.
And I think the facts clearly are differently, and I hope you take a look at them. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Kim.
Thank you, Chairman Mast. Thank you, Secretary Rubio, for joining us right here at the corner. Thank you for being with us today. Secretary Rubio, diversifying critical mineral supply chains away from China is a priority of both of us. I want to thank you and the department for your collaboration with my subcommittee on related legislation, which was already mentioned, Dominance Act, that we recently passed unanimously through this committee. The FY27 budget requests $5 billion for New America First Opportunity Fund, including $250 million for critical minerals. So can you expand on that request and clarify whether these funds are intended to support Forge, Pax Silica, the economic security zone in the Philippines that was announced on April 16, or other priorities?
Yeah, all of the above. We want to have the flexibility to jump on these opportunities in a very nimble and effective way. We have a couple things going on at the same time. The first is, I would say, a feature of our bilateral engagement all over the world. In every one of our embassies you travel to, and many of you have traveled, you will see that critical minerals and supply chains feature prominently in all the diplomatic work that we're doing. And we're actually having countries approach us and say critical minerals should be a part of our agreement and our relationship because they want to see those resources used to the benefit of their people in a responsible way. The second thing is we hosted this ministerial we followed up on in which we brought together dozens of countries from around the world who are all agreeing to this compact that we're going to cooperate with one another, not just for access to the minerals, but for access to the refining and processing capability that turns those minerals into useful parts of our supply chain. The third on Pax Silicas is very focused on the specific supply chain critical to the growth in AI and what you'll need in order to power AI in the 21st century. And when you point to the Philippines, that's a very creative opportunity in which there was this land that they control, that's in the government there actually used to have a military presence on it by the United States, and now that's going to be turned over as an innovation zone for this entire ecosystem. And we want to be nimble enough to be able to jump on these opportunities. Sometimes present themselves outside the regular, earmark process or the regular financing process, appropriations process of Congress. We don't want good opportunities to pass us by because our competitors around the world are much more nimble and able to move much quicker, and we've lost opportunities in the past because of that.
Thank you very much. This is exactly why we appreciate working with the administration and the priorities in this breaking that critical mineral supply chain from China. So thank you. In February, the administration released its long-anticipated Maritime Action Plan that rightly focuses on reindustrializing American shipbuilding and reducing reliance on Chinese-built ships. The plan notes but does not focus on the need to work with our international partners to address the short-term gaps in our shipping industry. My international counterparts have noted that absent a Ministry of Industry, they are unsure whom to engage on the U.S. side for international shipbuilding matters. So, Mr. Secretary, do you agree that the State Department should be the primary point of entry for these discussions? And if so, which office within the State Department should lead that?
Well, I'm not prepared to claim that as belonging to us, but I certainly know that our Economic Bureau will play a key role in it. And maybe it's better positioned in commerce. Potentially, the Department of War will have a role to play in this as well, because some of this involves shipbuilding for our Navy. I can say that in the case of Finland, we're entering into that agreement on the icebreakers, which will help. They'll help us, and they're very good at the construction of that. I know with South Korea, there's been part of our agreement with them is the ability to not just build ships here in the United States, but they may be able to build a few in South Korea as well. That would be helpful to us. So we are looking to this. Unfortunately, what has happened in the world is that the capacity of other than China, very few countries have invested heavily in their shipbuilding for a long time. That's an industrial capacity that's been lost because they've been subsidizing their industry and producing it at such a high rate. So that's one more thing that we need to reindustrialize to the broader world and ultimately, hopefully, to the United States and our shipyards here as well.
Thank you. Very quickly, on the Taiwan arms sales, it's already been addressed many times, but given the growing PRC threats against Taiwan, there is a strong bipartisan consensus here in Congress that Taiwan must receive the defensive system it has already purchased and paid for without undue delay. So can you provide an update on the current status of these deliveries and the administration's plan to expedite them?
Well, the first tranche, which was the single largest sale to Taiwan ever, was the $11 billion in December. That was approved and is moving. The second is, I think, the $14 billion one that is still under review, and it's under review for a variety of reasons that don't necessarily just include Taiwan. It includes the availability of the stocks in the short term. We have to balance that with our own procurement process. So it's normal to review it's a large sale. I mean, it's not small. It would be the biggest one ever. And I just remind everybody, the $11 billion we did in December, I believe, was more than was sold to Taiwan the entirety of the Biden presidency, and that just happened 5 months ago.
Representative Moskowitz.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today, and also thank you for staying until the end so all members can ask questions. A lot of secretaries don't do that, so thank you for doing that.
Tell me that was an option.
Take that up with the chairman. I want to talk, you went through a list of successes for the administration, one of which was the Shield of the Americas, and I know I thank the administration for creating the Shield of Americas and sending Kristi Noem out of the country. I want to focus on Iran for a second. I think when we talk about success, right, success is Iran is no longer pursuing nuclear weapons. Success is that the uranium they have is gone. And it's fulfilling 30 or 40 years of U.S. policy, right? That's success. Do you agree with that?
I mean, ultimately, we did it for a reason. We don't want there to be a nuclear-armed Iran.
So, look, Iran can make whatever pledges they want. It's not worth the paper it's written on. But making sure the nuclear dust is out, making sure the facilities that they have underground are gone, that is success. And I assume you would agree that any deal that you think the president should sign or not sign has to address those core issues.
Absolutely. So the removal of highly enriched uranium is an irreversible step. You remove it or you destroy it, it's not there anymore. On enrichment, those are limits, but if you're not inspecting it, they can always violate it. And as long as they have the equipment and the know-how, they could always violate it in the future as well. So that would have to be, that's the one that would have to be monitored. But the enrichment you could verify immediately because you either have it or you don't.
Yeah. And for me, I think you have to dismantle what's there and you have to get out what's there. I think that's the most critical piece because, you know, Iran has survived multiple administrations. That's their whole goal. Their whole goal is just run out the clock. They've run out the clock previously. And so the idea that they'll pledge to do something in the future, I just don't think we can trust that. Once we pull away the military, once we move on to another topic, their pledge is kind of irrelevant. Getting what's there removed, I think has to be the most important thing. Otherwise, it's hard to convince, I think, the American people that it was worth the success. We talked a lot about critical minerals. I think the administration is doing a really good job on critical minerals, these rare minerals that we need for our military, for, you know, technology. But I don't think the American people understand how important it really is and what China is doing around the world. I mean, do you think the administration could do a slightly better job on educating the American people why this is so important and why they should care about that?
Yeah, I think we all need to do a better job. And I started talking about this issue when I was in the U.S. Senate, but frankly, it's not sexy. You know, I mean, you have to explain it to people because they have to understand that you can build the greatest car in the world. You can build the greatest plane in the world. You can build the greatest weapons system in the world, and you can build the greatest technology and infrastructure in the world. If it's missing one little thing, one chip, one element that you need to build it, if it's missing that, the whole thing doesn't work. You can't do it.
Yeah.
I think back to the magnets that are critical to the cars, and when the Chinese cut us off and the world off of those magnets that they were producing for cars, no, I wasn't even that conversant in the issue before it happened. So I think there are vulnerabilities like that. We've mapped out those vulnerabilities. I would agree. I think this is going to require a sustained public campaign to tell people that when we talk about critical minerals, what we're actually talking about and why it's important.
And I think that's right. And I think people don't understand exactly the long game that China is playing. And I think it's important for U.S. foreign policy around the world. Mr. Secretary, you know, the war in Gaza is all over my algorithm, all over my feed every day. But you know what's not on my algorithm or anyone else's algorithm here or the kids in college? There's nothing about the Ukraine-Russia war, about the hundreds of thousands of people that are dead in that war, or the 25,000 people that were kids that were kidnapped, or all the kids that were killed in that war, the terrible images that exist in a real war. Why is it, do you think, and is it the Chinese again, that, you know, the algorithm is full of what's going on in the Middle East, but the Ukraine-Russia war, nothing. No images, no stories about the kids, no stories about the hundreds of thousands of people that are dead.
Yeah, I can't speak to the algorithms and what those systems are doing with regard to that. I can tell you that in addition to what you've just mentioned, I do think that, this is my observation, this war has now lasted longer than the Second World War. I don't want to use the term stalemate, but clearly both sides are trading a kilometer for a kilometer. An incredible death rate. The Russians are losing 5,000 soldiers a week, which is a crazy number. And the Ukrainians are losing people too, but not nearly as many are at the rate. It's sort of a stalemated, stagnated fight that now I think threatens to escalate because we're seeing these deep strikes into Russia and deep strikes into
And I don't want to cut you off, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I have only 9 seconds left. Cuba, real quick. Thank you guys for indicting Raul Castro. I wish it would have happened years ago. The Cuban people deserve to be free. The time has come. I'd love just to give you a minute or to talk about what you see for that island in the coming years.
And just to be clear, we didn't indict Raul Castro. A grand jury in South Florida indicted him, and then
Well, Americans indicted.
Yeah, no, but I know what you meant. I'm just saying I want to be clear. It was done through a grand jury. It wasn't. I've spoken to this a few moments ago as well. We'd like to see a better future in Cuba, one in which the Cuban people have something that looks like the way every other country in the Caribbean lives. The impediment there, unfortunately, is this military conglomerate that controls 70% of their GDP, and none of its revenue translates to the Treasury, and therefore doesn't translate to the benefit of the Cuban.
And Mr. Secretary, always great to see you. And just to change a little topics where it isn't Ukraine or Venezuela or Cuba or Taiwan or one of the big ones, Congress passed a U.S. Foundation for International Conservation in the 2025 NDAA. It passed with a wide bipartisan effort. I think you probably voted for it. But as you recall, what it was really an effort to have a public-private partnership to remove anti-poaching and cut off the funds for terrorist organizations in Africa, primarily, and you know the list. But I'm concerned, obviously, on it because per the law, it said that State Department was going to establish the board in consultation with Congress. Before, and the money's already been allotted, and there's a lot of money in there, and I just recently came back from Africa, and it's happening every day that the poaching activities are again funding the terrorist organizations who are going out. And what I'd like is a commitment from the State Department to move forward on appointing the board, because at the end of the day, nothing can happen until the board meets to unleash the leveraged private dollars, which are, I think, 2-to-1 ratio. That can't happen. The program is at all standstill until the State Department appoints the board in consultation with Congress, but the first step is with you. Could I have your commitment that you're going to prioritize this?
And I told others we're going to follow up on that, but I believe there's a presidential appointment role in that board, if I'm not mistaken about the, so we'll have to check with White House and personnel as well, but I'll get you an answer. The board has been the impediment. You're right.
Yeah, and my understanding is reading the law, it's the State Department appoints. Yeah, no doubt in coordination with the White House, but if you would prioritize it, because I think this program is an incredibly important and effective program because it leverages private dollars like we haven't seen in Africa, and it is a problem. And with that, Mr. Secretary, let me yield to my colleague from Florida, Ms. Salazar, who would like to ask you some questions and follow up.
Thank you very
Thank you again
much,
for your
Honorable.
service.
Yes. Mr. Secretary, I just want to continue with Cuba to see if we can finish your thoughts on it. As you were saying, ISA controls 70% of everything, the resources in Cuba. We know that the Castro family is the one in charge of that military mafia. Is there any way that we could find another Delcy #2, following the same example that we have in Venezuela, where we removed Maduro because the grand jury indicted him and he was in the transnational criminal organization lists? If that were to happen, could we find a Delcy #2?
Well, first of all, I think that some of the models you want to look at is the way the Czech Republic or Poland transitioned out of. And one of the things they did is they did preserve certain institutions in their society in order to provide stability and longevity to the project they were in. Even
we
in the midst.
understand that there are no institutions in
Well,
Cuba.
I think you're asking me to identify, is there specific individuals in the Cuban government? I think there are specific, maybe technocrats that
Okay.
you could work with.
And would you
I think
be
it's a little
okay?
harder when you get higher up because of the ideological bent that some of them have.
And I agree with what you're saying. People that are not, their hands are not full of blood. Could we consider the possibility in order to avoid civil wars and instability and chaos?
I think the United States is open to a negotiated situation that puts Cuba on a path towards democracy, prosperity, freedom, normalcy. We would be open to that, and we would work with whoever is open to doing it. Obviously, it'll be challenging, and that system is all I've said. I mean, some of these people have committed 67 years to this viewpoint. It isn't hard, it's not going to be easy for them to
We
pivot
know,
away
but
from
have
it.
we know that very well in our community, but have we been able to identify someone that could fill that role?
Well, I wouldn't say that we've identified a specific individual that could play that role. I think there are clearly people within the technocratic realm of the government that could play some role in all of this. But ultimately, if you're asking me, is there a singular individual right now that we would trust and rely on to lead this transition from start to finish? I can't give you that name right now.
I understand. Now, we know that today Raul turns 95 years old. At 95, you're pretty old, and making decisions is very hard. We know that El Cangrejo is his grandson, he's younger, 41 years old. Don't you think that maybe are you sending messages to the younger generation to convince Raul in order to make it easier for that island, like you said, to become Jamaica or Dominican Republic, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong?
Yeah, I think that there are clearly individuals within the apparatus of power in that country that understand that what they have now is not sustainable and needs to be fixed.
But they don't have power, do they? They cannot be decisions.
Even if they have power, they don't know how to do it, or they don't have enough power, because so much of it has to be consensus built internally. But there are clearly people that are aware that what they have now is not sustainable.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. I know that my colleagues have addressed the Iran and affordability of energy prices with you during this hearing already. Being from Texas, obviously energy is a big issue in our state, and I've heard repeatedly on the I just want you to know I've heard repeatedly on the campaign trail, and then from just my constituents in general, just how much the rise of gas prices is really hurting our economy. And I just want to express my concern that the administration did not properly analyze the effect of this war on gas prices, the effect of this war on the economy, the effect of this war on affordability. And I hope that you will take that into consideration as you make your further decisions, because it's very concerning. It's really hurting a lot of people at home. I'd like to focus my time with you on Afghan allies. I don't think that topic's been really brought up much today. The Trump administration continues to treat our Afghan allies with dishonor, in my opinion. In my district, Mohammed Nazir Paktawali who fought alongside U.S. Special Forces in Afghanistan, died in ICE custody after participating in the Afghan evac program. The United States brought him and his family here to this country. He was wrongfully detained and was, as a 41-year-old man, was dead 24 hours later. I'm very concerned what's happening with our Afghan allies and what we're doing in this country. Under your leadership, U.S. State Department dismantled the Office of Coordinator for Afghan Relocation Efforts and halted the visa processing for Afghan allies, abandoning thousands of our allies that are here. In my opinion, it's dishonorable and it's damaging. America will face fights tomorrow, and thanks to the Trump administration's treachery to this community, we may face them alone. I don't know how this administration can expect citizens from other countries to rise up and stand with us at great personal peril to themselves, based on a promise that we'll take care of them when they see how we have failed our promises to those from Afghanistan. Since you've been forgotten what this country stands for, I'd like to remind you of your own words from your own 2016 presidential campaign. Wherever freedom and human rights spread, partners of our nation are born. But whenever foreign policy comes unhinged from its moral purpose, it weakens global stability and forms cracks in our national resolve. I believe that this is what's happening with Afghanistan, sir. What is your plan to deal with our Afghan allies, with the brave men and women that stood alongside our military, that are here in this country? Is your plan to return them to the Taliban?
No, but that's not anyone's plan. I think the plan is to find a third safe country where they can go to that they're comfortable and choosing voluntarily to go there. And we're looking for more and more countries to step forward and assume it. As you know, the issues you raise are also tied into the broader migratory decisions that have been made by this administration. We're operating under an executive order right now that does not allow any Afghans into the country after the aftermath of the National Guard attack against the National Guard here in Washington, D.C. a year ago. And then there are also other DHS determinations. Our role, we continue to process the folks that are applying so that their paperwork is in order, but ultimately we don't want them stranded forever and where they are. We want them to be able to go to somewhere that's not Afghanistan, that they choose to want to go to and that are welcoming of them. And we actively are engaging countries around the world. There are 3 or 4 that have already spoken to us about their willingness to do it. Obviously, they're not going to take 1,000, but we might be able to get 300 here, 400 here, places where they feel comfortable going to and that are assuming and welcoming to them, not returning them to the Taliban. We understand that would not be the outcome we want to see.
Right. I do think that the position of the United States to now, by bringing these families to our country, after they honorably served our country, alongside our men and women, and now to say, now get out, we don't want you anymore, based on one isolated incident is morally reprehensible. It does a disservice to them, and it's wrong, and it's bad policy. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter the record on April 21st, the New York Times article, Trump is said to be in talks to send Afghans who aided with U.S. forces to the Congo. Mr. Secretary, is it the policy of this government to send these Afghan folks to the Congo?
That's just one country. The policy of the United States is to find multiple countries, and they would be able to choose which one they want to go to of the options that they're presented. And that was based on a leak of an internal document. That was just one country that expressed interest, but there are multiple others that have as well.
And so are they going to be forced to go to the country? What if they don't want to go to the Congo? What if they don't want to go to Afghanistan? What is their option?
No, we don't want to force any. That's why I'm saying we want to have multiple countries so they can choose. Here are the 5 or 6 countries that will let you go. Which one of them do you want to go to? It's not to force them, it's to give them options about places they can relocate.
Representative Biggs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Secretary Rubio, thank you for your service. This country finally has a Secretary of State who puts America first, and I'm very proud to stand with you. In February of 2025, the State Department eliminated nearly $60 billion from over 4,000 ongoing grants and another 54 $54 billion in multi-year USAID awards, money that was on autopilot, flying out the door every single year with zero accountability to the American people. Programs that spent $70,000 on a DEI musical in Ireland, $2.5 million on electric vehicles in Vietnam, and $6 million on tourism development in Egypt. That is waste, and that is fraud, and that is abuse of the American taxpayer dollars, plain and simple. I'm proud to stand with an administration that had the backbone to do what Washington has refused to do for decades. What has been eliminated is very significant. It is historic, and it is just the start. The savings from USAID cuts have already sparked serious proposals to redirect billions towards something that actually matters, like repairing veterans' homes. I'm talking about long-term veterans' homes like those in South Carolina and throughout this country. That is what America First looks like, not Sesame Street in Iraq, not transgender opera in Colombia. But Secretary Rubio, I would like to know what is still in that remaining portfolio that should not be there. What programs are still drawing a check that wouldn't survive 10 seconds of scrutiny in front of a working family in my district, like the 3rd District of South Carolina? And how do we complete the mission of putting America first in every single line item of this budget? Because I can tell you, the people in my district are not going to accept it. They are tired of hearing, well, we got most of it. What is your commitment, Mr. Secretary, to finishing the job?
Yeah, well, it's happening already. So USAID no longer functions. There is a USAID, but it's largely now operating as a wrap-up and wind-down operation. So that's what's happening at USAID. We took all the programs that were worth preserving and all the programs that were worth doing, and they're all under the State Department now. So you have the State Department is conducting foreign aid and foreign assistance within the context of the criteria that we've created, and those are outlined in this year's budget request. And then there are legacy programs that we did not bring over to the state that are still at USAID, some of which may not be operating any longer, but are tied up in litigation. They claim that they're owed money. They got a judge trying to get us to pay them, or if not, there's wind down costs in unwrapping those programs. They're not active programs, but some of them are under active litigation because the NGO is suing the government, and a judge is saying, well, you may have to pay them, so make sure you preserve the money until I rule on it. So those may take years to clear out. They're not active programs, but they're involved in litigation. But those are under the USAID portfolio, not under state. And I no longer am the acting official at USAID, and that's being run through the Office of Management and Budget.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the work and the efforts that you're doing, and I know our taxpayers in my district do. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Secretary Rubio, they've called our votes, but we have this last row of individuals to your left. Do you think we have time to work through them?
Yeah, we can't. I have to go to the Senate in a little while, but I'll talk fast.
Thank you. Representative Moylan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, thank you very much. We've been talking regularly. I appreciate all your interest into the Indo-PACOM. And last time we were out here at the hearing, we spoke about the importance of establishing a passport issuance office in Guam. And as you know, residents in Guam must have their passports issued from Honolulu, which creates a huge barriers in emergency situations. So I want to thank you again, your staff, for working with us on this issue. Now, can you briefly say, touch on where we're at with this process of establishing the passport issuance office in Guam, please?
We are on the status of it?
Yes.
I think we're working on trying to do it. We'd like to do it. I think there's, we may have news for you on that in a couple weeks as we're going through our review of our visa offices around the world. And it's part of our consolidation efforts is to free up resources for other places where it may be more useful. So I think we'll have news for you in a couple weeks if you just bear with us.
It's quite exciting. Thank you, Secretary. And last year, I introduced a bipartisan Clean Pacific Act with Rep. Case, Radaragan, and King Hines to establish Pacific Islands Counter-Narcotics Initiative to assist partner nations with counter-drug interdiction efforts. This year's budget request contains strong support for INCLE and outlines the strategic priority disrupting U.S. inbound illicit drug flows, especially fentanyl, meth, and cocaine, and expanding U.S. advantage and access in regions critical to the national security like Indo-PACOM. Can you speak how the State Department is working with partner nations in the Pacific to combat narcotic trafficking in the region?
Absolutely, and our Department of War partners and our DHS partners are also involved in that effort. And it involves two things. Number one is allowing us, in some cases, to cooperate with them, to work alongside them in this work. And the other is building their domestic capacity so they can have better awareness. Some of it is domain awareness, radar systems. In other cases, we're providing that to them, the intelligence that they need to action. The third is training and equipping, which obviously is a key part of being able to take on these groups. The challenge with these transnational groups is that in some cases, they have more money and better weapons than the actual host government. It's been a problem in place after place. But as you've seen more recently, Guatemala's now entered an agreement with us. We're cooperating very closely with Ecuador. El Salvador has been there from the beginning. We're hopeful that we can increase our cooperation under the new administration in Honduras. So I think we've made good progress in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And how do you believe Guam and the other territories can leverage their strategic location for promoting foreign policy interests in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, a couple points, obviously. Number one is many of these as a domain awareness, just from a geographic perspective, the ability to be there allows you from the military side to be able to station forces, but also allows you to do more activities regarding the safety of navigation, the freedom of navigation, domain awareness to control, to support that, the safety of undersea cables that are increasingly under threat from being disrupted. And there's a whole host of areas, illegal fishing. There's a whole host of things of cooperation that we could reach, and that the Pacific Islands are geographically prime located to really help us. And we've given them more attention. We've been more engaged at a bilateral level than we've ever been with Pacific Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And final question. In the recent years, we've seen malign influence grow in the Indo-Pacific and threatening the stability of the region. How is the State Department responding to the increased CCP-related funding and police training across the Pacific?
Again, it's a topic that we're raising with our partners, but first on awareness. It's not just in the Pacific. We've seen extrajudicial, extraterritorial efforts on the part of the CCP in multiple places around the world. And so in all of our diplomatic engagements, we raise these issues with these countries. The opening of police stations, the sending of individuals to harass Chinese nationals that are abroad, who they view as a threat or what have you. It's become a feature of much of our engagement in many countries around the world.
Mr. Secretary and Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield my last minutes to Rep. Salazar, please.
She's got this thing rigged. Her time, that's great.
It's 5 minutes.
I know, I understand.
So, okay, so let's continue then with the Cuba issue and with the Venezuela. I was asking you earlier today that Venezuelans have a desire to have free and fair elections. So we know that we are in the country, that we've liberated them, but the big question is and you answered me partially. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to finish. Why can't we just establish and send the signal to the Delcy group and to all the Maduro people that were cooperating with the Maduro regime that are still in power because of Delcy? Why can't we just send a clear message that elections will be coming, let's say, December of 27, beginning of 28? In that way, I think the rule of law will start. They will have the impression that the rule of law will be established.
Yeah, I think that impression's been clear. I mean, the Venezuela that everyone wants for the future is not possible without free and fair elections. They have to understand that it's been a feature of all of our engagements with them, and it continues to be. I'm not sure it would serve that purpose to announce a date certain, in a public forum, because the conditions have to be in place. It's not just about saying I'm going to call elections in December or January. It's about, is there a free press? Are political parties able to organize and operate? That has to happen, too.
And we agree, Mr. Secretary.
Your time's expired. All right, your time's expired.
Mr. Chair,
we do want to get through multiple members and get to Mr. Miller, so if you could go as quickly as you can before votes.
Thank you. You spoke about the 60% enriched uranium. Iran also has significant amounts of 20% enriched uranium. The more difficult part is to go from 5% to 20%. What is your view in negotiations of the 20% uranium?
Well, I've used the term highly 60% because that's the one that clearly has. I mean, even 20%, you could argue, not that I claim that they are, but you could argue they're being used for medical isotopes and things of this nature. But 60%, there's no reason for it. The only way you get to 60 is because you're on your way to 90. But the term we actually use in the talks and in everything we're on is highly enriched uranium.
So it would be
So
correct.
that would cover the 20, correct.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Well, listen, I want to congratulate you for the impressive job you're doing for the American people. My only critique would be that we need to hear more from Marco Rubio. President Trump is obviously in a class by himself, but you're the best communicator in the administration on complex foreign policy issues. I was in the room with you in Munich, so I know you wear a lot of hats. There's a lot of memes about you, but please continue to be as vocal and upfront as you can. A question I have about is expeditionary diplomacy. I had the privilege of serving as a State Department officer in Iraq during the Iraq surge. I had twice passed A100 classes and had offers to be FSO, but I actually came in as a 3161 hire at the time because the State Department did not have a capability for expeditionary counterinsurgency. This is something I've been working on with former Ambassador Ryan Crocker to both develop this capability, look at something like a State Department Reserve Corps, and also as a legacy of Benghazi, there has been, because of the politics around it, there has been sort of this mindset set in that we can't take any casualties amongst State Department officers. We need to have people in the State Department that can push out and can serve. And I wish if you could speak to the American people and to State Department officers about what your view is about a more expeditionary function.
It's a concept we're very interested in, and I know you're interested in it as well. And just I can put it in simple terms, it's basically the ability to deploy diplomats in a place where we may not have an embassy and we may not have all the trappings. Obviously, diplomatic security and others get concerned because in their mindset, the risk factor should be zero. They don't want anyone being harmed. But I think the point you're raising is there are some instances in which you will take some risks. People know they're signing up for a risky proposition, but it's a high reward for the country if in fact they're successful. So we're interested in the concept. We obviously have to work through our system to make sure we can align it and create something that's functional. And I'd love to work with you on it because I see the promise in the concept for sure. And it's a concept that's existed in the past.
And thank you. Just finally, and being mindful of our time considerations, I think you guys have done an amazing job of needed reforms and bringing USAID under the province and State Department, and certainly de-wokifying some of the nonsense that was going on. We still do have a lot of great State Department officers out there that are very proud to serve our country, and under your leadership, I do talk to some of them from time to time, and they do have some worry and some questions about the overall direction of the institution. So I'd just like to give the ability in the context of this budget request you're making to Congress to sort of sum up your thoughts, the vision of our current State Department officers for the future.
Yeah, I think for the futures, we're trying to empower our we're trying to empower our embassies through our regional bureaus around the world. We want them to be the center focus of how we conduct foreign policy because they're on the ground. Too often in the past, foreign policy was mixed between, or diplomacy was mixed between the regional bureaus, and then you had these functional bureaus that had a worldwide mandate on a topic, and they ended up crashing into each other. Now what we want is to truly empower our ambassadors and the people in the field in these embassies that are on the ground every single day. We want decisions to be driven from the bottom up, not from the top down. Some of our best ideas come from the cables that are coming out of the field and back to us. And we want regional bureaus that are empowered as well to be able to coordinate all this when the lines cross between different countries in the same region. We're also encouraging greater regional integration. So for example, our Western Hemisphere ambassadors are now all are about to start a monthly conference call so that they're all coordinating with each other on regional affairs. These are the kinds of things that we're trying to encourage, but ultimately what we want is a State Department whose foreign policy is driven by the national interest and understands that first and foremost, you have to define what's in the national interest and you have to pursue it in a pragmatic and effective way. That's what we want our diplomacy to be about, and I think some of that mission had been lost. And that's why multiple secretaries of states before me had tried or wanted to reorganize the State Department and weren't able to do it. I'm glad we did, and I think it's going to get stronger every year under this new organizational scheme.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Yield back.
Representative Luna.
Secretary Rubio, thank you for being here today. I was wondering if you could let me know if you are familiar with the name of Neville Roysingham.
Yeah, he's I think an American millionaire living in China who's funding all of these left-wing radical loons.
Correct. When you were on Senate Intelligence, you had actually sent a letter encouraging the Department of Justice to look into him for a FARA violation. For those people who will see this clip later on the internet, can you just briefly explain what FARA is?
It's the Foreign Agent Registration Act, and it means if you're operating on behalf of a foreign country, you have to register and declare yourself as such.
To provide some context for those looking at this, Mr. Singham's in total given $1.3 million to an organization called Code Pink, as well as over $278 million to various nonprofits since 2017. Secretary Rubio, it's in my opinion, observing what's been happening on both sides, really contributing to the political divide in this country, that many countries are engaging in influencer operations, to include psychological operations on the American people, with the intent to undermine not just our foreign policy from the administration's perspective, but also to pit us against one another. Would you concur with that statement?
There's no doubt, absolutely.
Are you aware of any countries in particular that are currently engaging in this?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt that we see evidence of it from the CCP. We've historically seen some of it as well from Russia historically in the past in a different way. I think you're starting to see some of it from Cuba, and I think some of these are linked with one another. In fact, that group that you just mentioned actually traveled to Cuba, stayed at a very fancy and expensive hotel that is sanctioned, and I think are now being looked at by the appropriate officials to see if they violated U.S. law in the trips that they're taking. But there's no doubt that when you have people showing up with pre-printed signs 24 hours after Nicolas Maduro was arrested and extradited to the United States, that's not an organic movement. Someone's paying for that.
I think one of those organizations would be the National Network on Cuba, which is a pro-communist, anti-American organization comprised of dozens of member organizations to include Code Pink, the Communist Party USA, Democrat Socialists of America, Socialist Worker Parties, and various organizations to include Armed Queers of Salt Lake City, which Tyler Robinson, the individual who murdered our friend Charlie Kirk, has loose ties to an association with at the time of the assassination. I just want to point out that from my perspective and in talking with you personally, I can see that you are very much of the mindset of peace through strength, but also pursuing peace first before you hit people with a big stick. So I appreciate that perspective because it is refreshing and not common in Washington, D.C. But with that being said, I heard a lot of talk today on Russia specifically. I understand that peace talks are very much so alive and well, and that the United States, for the first time ever, at least with this administration and you heading the head of the as the Secretary of State, have been instrumental in those talks. I would like to, though, ask you, for the first time in 20 years, recently, we had the Russian Duma come here to meet with members of Congress. What is the end result when Congress fails to open up dialogue and at least maintains communications with another superpower like Russia?
Well, I think there's two things to discuss. One is the war in Ukraine, which we'd like to see end through a negotiated settlement. And separate from that is a bilateral relationship with a country that possesses, if not the largest, the second largest nuclear arsenal in the world. At a minimum, we have to have relations and conversations with Russians. We just do, whether we like what they're doing or not, because given those factors that I just pointed to, I've had multiple conversations with the Foreign Minister Lavrov, and we have to, because that's mature diplomacy and it's important. It's the same with China. We have to have communication with them, and there are issues in our bilateral relations that have nothing to do with Ukraine. So now, I think our relations with them will be friendlier and easier to pursue once the war in Ukraine is wrapped up, and we've made that point in this engagement. But I think what we've learned, and certainly I think has been affirmed to us in the last year and a half, is you're much better off having someone to talk to on the other side than not. And this is a president who's willing to meet with and talk to anybody. He doesn't view talks and engaging a foreign counterpart as a concession, the way it's been treated in the past. Sometimes it leads to something, sometimes it leads to nothing, and sometimes that vehicle of communication proves incredibly valuable in a potential conflict or crisis.
I'd like to end by saying this. I completely agree with you. I think that it is our job and responsibility in Congress to maintain open dialogue and discussion. But I do think that you guys will be successful in this peace deal. And so I want to be the first to congratulate you on that, because I think that sometimes in this instance, having the courage to step up and do the right thing and lead by example is a big thing. So with that, Chairman, I yield the rest of my time.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you. You were the first person I worked for when I started in politics, and this is very unique for me. But first and foremost, I just want to say thank you for the job that you've been doing. People back home, they comment on your stability, your bearing, and how you represent our country on the world stage. Thank you for doing that. And look, you're sitting here today and for several hours, and our colleagues on the left, for the vast majority of them, they want to get a political stunt. They don't want to hear your answers. And that's why they wouldn't let you and afford you the ability to speak, because they know that you would school them in every which way possible and actually tell them that 2 + 2 = 4. And for a lot of them, that's hard to understand. So I respect your ability. But look, you have been, asked a ton of tough questions. This is your time, if you would like it. I know you have spoken a lot today, but if there is anything that you would like to correct the record on, by any of our colleagues on the left or even on the right that may have misspoken, I'd like to give you this time if you would like it. And just one last thing, when you're done with all of this, if you could come to Cleveland, Ohio, I know it's not where you're from, but the Cleveland Browns could use a really good coach. And so with all the different hats you've been wearing, maybe you could take us to a Super Bowl. But at that point, I leave the rest to you, sir.
Well, I don't claim I can lead that to Super Bowl, but I wish them luck in Cleveland on that. Look, I thank you for the opportunity. I think we've covered almost everything, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that. Unfortunately, I have to be in the Senate here in just a few minutes, and they get really mad if you're late. But I just want to touch off by saying, look, every element of our foreign policy and everything we do, including aid, is now synergized, and it's about the national interest. And I do think it's important to point out and continue to point out, we are the most generous country in the world. By far, we give way more money than anybody else does to all of these things. Other countries who are very rich, powerful countries should step up too if they want to join in helping. There's no evidence that that's the case. We've seen a little bit of an increase among some countries, but it's not just us, the Canadians, the UK, other European countries have cut back in their expenditures as well on foreign aid. Not timed with us, it just happens to be they have those domestic considerations to take into account. This is the most generous country in the world. This year alone, there will be millions of people around the world that will receive food and medicine and medical care and in a way that furthers our national interest, but is also good for them. And we do that more than anyone on the planet. Foreign aid and what this country does to help people around the world is something we should be proud of, but it has to be done the right way. We can't be spending money on things that don't further the national interest, and we can't be spending money on things that waste the taxpayer dollars, and we can't be spending money on social experiments around the world that further the aims of an ideological movement in the United States. That's not what foreign aid is ever supposed to have been about, and that's where we're going to get it back to. On foreign policy, we're going to be pragmatic, but we're going to be principled at the same time. We have to understand that when it comes to foreign policy, oftentimes you're not given the choice between the clearly good one and the clearly bad one. Sometimes you're given two bad choices, and you're trying to figure out which one of these two bad choices is the least harmful to the country. In the end, at the end of the day, foreign relations between countries is about one thing, the national interest. I expect that every time I meet with a foreign minister of another country, that foreign minister is going to push for what is in the interest of their country. I need to push for what's in the interest of ours. Not what's in the interest of the world, not so what's in the interest of what's in the interest of ours. In those cases where our where our national interests align, that's where cooperation happens. That's where alliances are formed. In those instances where our interests don't align, that's where you hope that diplomacy and cooperation can find a way through. But in the end, our foreign policy must always be about what is best for America before anything else. This is not a novel concept. It is a classic concept and one that was lost for a long time in American foreign policy, and I'm happy and honored to be a part of trying to restore it.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Chairman, you're back.
Final member, Representative McKenzie. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Rubio, for joining us today. I have the pleasure of representing Allentown, Pennsylvania. It's home to one of the largest Syrian-American populations in the country. And obviously, there have been a number of atrocities in that country during the ongoing conflict there, some of them targeting the Christian population. On June 22nd of last year, the Mar Elias bombing happened at a church, and we are coming up on that one-year anniversary. I'd like to just ask you very briefly if you can give us an update on what's going on in Syria, what we're doing to achieve stability in that country with the leadership that is now in place, and also any updates on religious minority protections.
Yeah. Well, we talked a lot today about Venezuela and other places. Syria is far more complicated. First of all, Assad deliberately divided groups in that country against each other, and some of those frictions and some of those resentments exist. That wasn't always the case in Syria. It's one of the few places in the Middle East where you actually had Sunni, Shia, Christian, Druze, and other communities living, and Kurds living alongside one another. But Assad, and especially during the civil war period, pitted these groups against each other. So in many cases, when you're seeing these atrocities, what you're seeing is some unit of some fighting group from one side going after and seeking retribution against a group in another. And it's a real challenge. I think you've seen a diminution in this, but nonetheless it exists, and it's already happened too much. The second is, the core here, and our goal is to have a nationalistic government in Damascus that seeks not to expand power or not to turn Syria into a base of operations for a foreign power, but to build a Syrian state that's inclusive of all of the elements in it. That's what we have engaged with the interim government there on. That's what we've engaged, and we've given them and tried to give them every opportunity possible to succeed. We've had some successes. As an example, when we had some fighting break out, especially in the Northeast, and we had these ISIS prisons, this is an underreported story, but we had these ISIS prisoners there. They agreed and were very cooperative in getting those prisoners transferred out of Syria and into Iraqi prisons before there would be a jailbreak that could threaten them and also threaten the region. I think we've seen significant progress in the relationship between Kurds and the central government. There's more work to be done, but some of that tension has now been downplayed. Down in the south, there's more complexity, of course. There are different Druze elements and Bedouin elements that have been more difficult to deal with, but we're trying to give the Syrian government there that's in place every opportunity to succeed. And obviously, there's a trust but verify component to this. I will say this, and I want to be, everything we've asked them to do, they have tried to do or have done, including counterterrorism cooperation. But they have some capability gaps. They still have individuals within their armed forces, quote unquote, that are members of radical groups and have certain ideologies and aren't necessarily neatly disciplined. I think they're working through that, but there's a challenge again because of capacity. So this is a long-term project, one that I think is going to exist long after this administration. I hope the next administration will pick up the baton. But I remind everybody that just 2 years ago, Syria was an operating base for the Iranian regime and all of its proxies. And had Syria stood on the table for them, it's interestingly enough, in the midst of epic fear and everything that's happening in the region, the one country that didn't see any of this. You saw it in Lebanon, you saw it in Iraq, you didn't see it in Syria. And I think that alone is a sign of why what's happening there has been good, but not good enough. We have a long ways to go.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that detailed answer and your continued focus on Syria and improving stability in the country. The Syrians I know and the Syrian Americans say that they don't see those differences along religious lines. That is, as you pointed out, divisions that were created by somebody else. So what we can do to heal those divisions, protect religious minorities in the country, and ultimately get back to a stable and safe Syria for all those individuals is a
We agree
great goal.
100%. The future that the government in place now claims to want is impossible unless every element of Syrian society is incorporated in power sharing and has a voice and influence over its own future, and of course isn't being killed.
Thank you again and look forward to working with you as we move forward. I yield back.
Mr. Secretary, I thank you for your valuable testimony today. Members may have some more questions for you. They will have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to length limitations. And without objection, this committee stands adjourned.